This is Ed in San Diego. Today is Friday, September 16, and thank you for joining us on Global TV Talk Show. In just a few minutes, our special guest is going to be David Edick Jr. He's a businessman, also lives here in the San Diego region, and has been our guest on several programs. David Edick is a professional in the world of world business. He has deep experience in operating and living in different countries, and that includes Russia and across Asia Pacific, as well as in other locations. He's also the past president, and in fact, is still on the board of the San Diego World Affairs Council. So he has a global perspective, and every time Dave is on the program, I learn new things. And so we're going to be talking about what's going on today, and there's plenty to talk. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Ed in San Diego, and special guest is David Edick Jr. He's an expert in world affairs. Welcome, David.
Hey, good morning, Ed. Great to be here with you.
Welcome back. Okay, recently you've given a couple of talks with people who are educated in world affairs also, or maybe not everybody, but some wannabes. But you've recently talked about the Ukraine war and the energy crisis coming in Europe. You know, I'm just an outsider looking in, and I've noticed almost a concerted effort to not talk about what's going on in detail. So that means that there are things going on, from my experience, behind the scenes, and equally, whoever these people discussing things are, they've decided equally, jointly, to keep a lid on things until we can solve some problems here. Is that take correct? Particularly, let's just say, especially in light of Putin's remarks yesterday, and wherever he was in China, but seems to be a role developing for President Xi, if that's how to pronounce this guy's name right, as a peacemaker, a go-between, with regard to Ukraine.
Well, it's an interesting idea. That idea was actually floated in the early days of the war. I think you're right about kind of a subtle silence. What's going on is deeply disconcerting. I mean, for sure, the more anyone knows, the less they know. And there's an awareness of that, and of sailing into troubled waters. Now, Putin's getting together with Xi Jinping in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, as part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. It's a big Asian grouping. Some try to call it an Asian NATO. It's not really that. It's more of a talking shop, a collaborative shop. And it's my understanding that Putin acknowledged to Xi that well, Ukraine was a problem. It's a problem for Putin for sure. Things have not gone to plan, and the recent chaotic retreat in northeastern Ukraine, a Ukrainian offensive, well organized and well planned, was met by a completely disorganized response on the Russian side, and there is a huge crisis of confidence building within the Russian military regarding its leadership, and a growing political awareness and a bit of more than a bit of resentment in national circles in Russia that Vladimir Putin has performed poorly. So all those things thrown together.
Highly unusual, isn't it? That we know about it. They talk about it.
I'm going to admit that this has been a busy day for me yesterday, and I'm not totally up to speed on exactly how things rolled out. I'll be honest with you, I'm wary of how things are presented in media. So I do want to see more of it myself. You know, it's important for leaders to be honest with each other. It is an immensely complicated situation, a very consequential one. The Chinese were caught off guard substantially by the action, but they're also caught off guard by just how profound the consequences, the reaction to all this are. And it very much affects China, which is in a delicate position of its own. Xi Jinping himself is in a delicate position of his own.
Well, in the next month or so, right?
Well, he's coming back for his third term in a lifetime appointment, it so seems. But it is important. He's looking to line up all the power positions in Beijing to really be in command. And they have a serious economic challenge in China, along with a COVID challenge, which is kind of convenient in a way to keep control of things, but it's also having very significant economic consequences inside China. So there's kind of a race to this party Congress to get it done before the wheels really come off, you know. And monetary policies changing in DC, and that affects China as well.
Yeah, lots going on.
Yes.
Do you want to also address something more local, the cross-border Tijuana, San Diego issues, particularly the sewage?
Wow, you know, it's kind of the story that just keeps on giving, you know.
Well, and the garbage keeps on flowing.
And it all keeps flowing. You know, and the Mexicans aren't thrilled with it either, but it's a real problem here in San Diego. And sometimes we really truly acknowledge it. It's been a more significant problem than we have let on to ourselves. The way the currents work off of Point Loma, coming around Point Loma, means that the sewage outflow and south of the border spirals north along Imperial Beach and the Strand and Coronado. And Coronado's a very expensive place, you know, Hotel Del and other, you know, $2-3 million houses. People want to be able to go in the water. And if you're spending $500 a night for a hotel room and you're in from the Midwest or from Western Europe, you want to be able to go in the water. And so there's another set of plans to repair and expand sewage treatment in Tijuana to take care of this. The Mexicans have put up a chunk of money, but the money in the US is still bottled up. The rest of the Congress in the United States gets a say on this, and when they think of the border, they think of, you know, illegal aliens and border out of control, and they got their political interests, which rarely coincide with our interests in the greater San Diego cross-border region.
So in today's paper, which I read online, the San Diego paper, I don't know who said it. There was some kind of a news story about the border. Maybe it was Mayor Todd Gloria. It was addressing the issue, among some other things. But he mentioned that his advisors, whose names I won't say right now, have said that to keep in mind it's better to not open the border, but make it easier and faster to legally get across the border either
Mhm.
way, rather than make it more difficult for the economy of the whole region. And they address the issue that it's a mega multinational economy, not to separate it for the good of everybody, including the sewage problem.
Sure. Yeah. So, we have this trans-border region, which over the period of a little bit more than a generation has turned into one of the great manufacturing centers in the world. It's a rather well-kept secret, even here in San Diego.
Maquiladora means
Uh,
they make it over there and all the execs live here.
well, that's the old model, yes. Where you source the parts primarily in North America or in Asia, take them to Mexico, where they would be assembled by inexpensive labor, and then sent to the United States, and indeed where the Japanese or American or the executives would live over here, the managers would live here. The high value added would be abroad as well. That has changed as the manufacturing has become more sophisticated there, and increasing numbers of components are sourced locally. The quality is the sophistication of the manufacturers is quite high now. This is not sewing together clothes, which I can't do. It does require some sophistication, but in terms of electronics, high-end electronics, it's very interesting. But the reality is that there is an international border, and the legal system in Mexico is fundamentally different than that of the United States. And on this side of the border, Americans have a different relationship with international borders than, I would say, many people around the world. We expect to be able to come and go freely at any time with convenience. And for other people, it's a different set of rules, a different set of standards. It's for them, not for us, which is complicated at the border because we all cross the same border. The big challenge is that, in fact, we like to build things, but uh, we're less interested and less attentive to actually staffing them. And so it's normal for many of the border crossing checkpoints to be closed. I mean, they're the lanes. So they've expanded the border crossings in our area, in the San Diego Tijuana region, tremendously. A lot of new infrastructure, but the staffing, it's the same old game, and you can wait hours to cross. They've created special lanes for special people to get through, and to get those permits, it takes time, it takes money. But those are special lanes, medical lane, the Sentry lane. But most people are crossing through the regular lanes, and it's a normal wait, an hour or two. It's normal. But you never really know until you get there what kind of wait it's going to be. So a lot of uncertainty, inconvenience, and if you're sitting in a car for a couple hours, sometimes Mother Nature calls, and it's not always a convenient place to be sitting around for a couple hours, and you're kind of in between. It's a fascinating place. It's very important for San Diego. It's very important for Mexico. And as we talk about this, there are some that want to divide the world, or certainly pull back American dependency, if you will, on manufacturing in China, and want to get it out of China. Bringing it to Mexico is within the North American free trade zone. There's a lot of interest in doing that, a lot of talk about it. We'll see how it all plays out. but that border needs to be open, certainly for goods and for people. It needs open in the sense that um, convenient within the legal framework. Okay. Right now, it's inconvenient in the legal framework, despite what somebody 1,000 miles away might think about the border.
So here we are.
Yeah.
We both live in San Diego,
We
and
do.
so
Yeah.
and there's a lot of us here, but hardly anybody ever thinks about it or cares about it, other than those who need to or want to go across that border legally. Every day there's like what 50,000. I forget what the numbers are, but
It's
it's a
yeah.
huge number. Legal every day.
It's essentially the busiest land crossing in the world.
Yeah.
Immensely busy, and for America, for Norte Americanos, for citizens of the United States or residents of the United States, our relationship with that border is different than it is for Mexico. California used to be part of Mexico back in the day, back in the 19th century, up until the War of 1846, when the United States took it. And those roots, those Mexican roots, are still here if you look for them. And in the generations since, as Tijuana went from being a dusty, sleepy village to a major metropolitan city, that particularly Mexican families have family on both sides of the border. And for them, the border is much more of an inconvenience, but it's also a kind of a protection as well. It opens up some interesting things to think about and talk about. But there's a family aspect of that the border interacts with, that for most U.S. citizens or residents, they don't have that. Although there's more of a retirement communities of American citizens, Canadians along the coast south of Tijuana, and growing numbers of people live in Tijuana because San Diegans live in Tijuana because the housing costs are so much lower, and their students and low-income workers either figure out the border or tolerate the border crossing headaches. But it is very important, and to the economy here, not just through the maquiladora, but the movement of people, the day-to-day shopping that people do. It's measured in billions, and it's taken for granted, I think, and in many parts of San Diego. People go about their lives. Who can blame them? You know, we all have our interests and occupations and preoccupations. What matters is a certain element of trust and tolerance. You know, and it's not just us tolerating somebody else; it's somebody else tolerating us.
So there's a movement in my industry to promote the remote work, of course, living and remote in Mexico. Not only from U.S., mostly U.S., but also Canadians, particularly from Toronto area. And they're living in Mexico City, of course, it's a huge area. And north in Monterey is a big manufacturing center. But in Mexico City, there's a lot of Americans living there and working there, and they have been on my program using Zoom, or and you never know they're in Mexico.
Yeah, yeah,
right.
Well, good broadband connection, and that's been one of the fascinating things during the pandemic, is how fast we've grown this. And it turns out that outside the United States, broadband is pretty strong in a lot of places, and Mexico City is certainly one. A huge city with everything and anything, and the costs are much lower, generally speaking, than they are here. So there's the combination of something new, something interesting, and less expensive. And that's, to be honest, this is a bit of a diversion on what we're talking about. We need to get serious in this country about costs, and the cost of living, beyond just kind of a political or a topic, but the fact of the matter is that we're tearing apart our society by letting the cost of living get so out of control. We we're in a very difficult situation here. We're just waking up to it in San Diego. How people can afford to have a place to live, a place to rent, let alone have a house. And have a job that, if we're going to pay people $100,000 a year to do something that we're paying them 30 now, well, but the cost of living, and this is certainly from the perspective of the progressives, if you will. But I mean, in California, the cost of energy, housing, food, uh, salaries, earnings are not keeping up with those costs. And it's pushing people to Mexico City. As much as Mexico City pulls, there is a push factor as well. And anyways, Mexico City is one of those destinations for sure, and there are others. I mean, there's the remote work, uh, the establishing of communities abroad that provide the amenities and experience that is accessible for people from the United States or Canada, but at a different cost structure with the exotic, different, intriguing, exciting environment. Enough excitement to make it fun. In Mexico, there are places that you can do this, and not just Mexico City.
So let's talk a little bit about the energy crisis in Europe. Now, basically, it's caused by Putin and shutting off supply of natural gas, which everybody seems to need. And so I am not as schooled in this as you. I just read what's going on and watch TV. But
well,
you have industry background in this.
So there's more to it than that. So yes, Russia, Vladimir Putin directed an invasion of Ukraine, a disastrous, tragic, awful thing. And the response from Europe has been to, and not just Europe, but from the West, so to speak, has been to draw back and reduce, if not end and foreclose any kind of dependency, energy dependency or trade. And much of the European economy was a dependence is it was those inexpensive supplies of energy were important and remain important still in some areas to the living standard and successful operation of a very big economy, Western Europe. Europe, in response to the Russian invasion, the European Union issued a policy called Repower EU, which laid out that they were going to cut off any connection with Russian gas by the year 2030, and that 2/3 of that would be done this year. It's no surprise that, and I mean, that's really a declaration of economic war. So it's gone from a war in Ukraine, a physical war of guns, to an economic war of sanctions, and the natural gas war really, it's an economic war. And the Russians have engaged with that through shutoffs and the pipelines. The whole situation has become politicized. Um, there are no innocent parties at this, except for the ordinary people trying to go about their daily affairs. I think it's really important to understand this that the politicization is everyone's involved in doing that. But the consequences are enormous. The explosion in prices, and we're just getting started with this. With natural gas is now going to, coal is a story that didn't get told very much, but natural gas has been the epicenter of it. And it may move into oil in December and again in February, where the Europeans will have said they will sanction and embargo Russian oil and Russian oil products. I'll bring it back around to the opening of our conversation, where there's a lot going on, but it doesn't seem that people are seeing that our leaders are really talking about it with us. And that is because we have all embarked, sometimes with forethought, sometimes as a reaction. We've sailed off into some uncharted territory. The Russians are doing tremendous damage to their future. Let's be clear, but they're also saying that bye-bye. You know, they'll pay a huge price for that. Europe will pay a huge price for it as well. Essentially, substantial deindustrialization of their economy and a increase in the overall cost structure of that economy, and it will significantly impact the competitiveness of the European economy all across the board, most notably in manufacturing and energy intensive activities.
So let me ask you about the importation of U.S. natural gas and natural gas from other places.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, let's just say there's a parade of ships going from Texas to wherever they offload it. I don't know where, Rotterdam, or I don't know where the pipelines are there. But that's the route. So it could be, who knows, but it could be a factor of leading to a war, whereby Russia is so hurt that they're striking back against the American-led cartel. And maybe China decides, Putin, you're a crazy person. I don't want you to do these things. And then Putin gets mad there, but doesn't really get upset with Xi. And so he's like a caged lion. And he starts attacking some of these freighters across the Atlantic, sink ships. And this is war footing.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a war with NATO, and it's clear to me that the Kremlin doesn't want to go there. Kremlin prefers to leverage someone else's power against them. The concept of judo is very, very important to understand how Vladimir Putin approaches the application of power.
Judo, he's a master of that, right?
Yeah, he's taken it very seriously for his lifetime. And there are a lot of lessons that come out of that. And one of the fundamental ones to be successful with judo is you take advantage of someone else's strength and use it against them. Your opponent uses the strength to complicate their own situation, basically. And the Russians and Putin are not going to go head to head with NATO by intent. I don't see any interference with U.S. LNG tanker traffic. that would be war, big time. And the benefits that the Russians would collect from that would be pretty minimal, and even the Kremlin at a tremendous cost. So I just don't see them doing that. Now the Europeans, leadership in particular, we all have our own specialties. We're more knowledgeable about some things than other things. And in general, the world's political leadership, particularly in the West, has not been very knowledgeable about energy. And now they need to be very knowledgeable and practical about energy today, not tomorrow, today. They need to know. So it's been a very, very steep learning curve. And the view from Europe was that, well, we'll dump the Russians and we'll pay the extra to liquefy American natural gas, put it into tankers and ship it all the way across the Atlantic. And there are facilities all along the coast of Europe, in the Mediterranean, the coast of Spain and Northwest Europe, the UK, all the way over to Poland. There are facilities to take this LNG and liquefy it and put it into the gas grid. And they're building more of them. Problem is there's not so much American gas relative to what people's expectations are. And that includes even here in the United States. So the growth of American gas production has been pretty sluggish the last few years. But there's a great push to build more LNG export facilities, and because of the slow increase in production, what we're going to see is a substantial increase in prices for natural gas in the U.S. beyond where we are now. Just think in terms of, prices like $8.50 here today, and in Europe it's in the mid to upper 50s. And so that arbitrage is going to attract a lot of commercial traffic. I mean, you can make a couple $100 million on a cargo of LNG right now if you have an old contract, long-term contract, and you were able to buy it on those old prices, ship it to Europe at spot market prices. And in fact, LNG that would have been heading to China, for example, which has got a sluggish situation now, they're selling it back into the international market, and it's ending up in Europe. But what Europe has embarked on is an immense repowering of their society. And it turns out that within the greater planetary energy system, you can't easily take 10% of global supply and set it aside. Everybody else was running pretty tight. And so we're in an environment where prices are explosive, and that will attract new supply in time. But in the meantime, it's going to destroy a lot of demand. So in Europe, fertilizer factories, steel factories, petrochemical plants, agriculture hothouses are shutting down, going out of business. And because it's an integrated ecosystem, of industrial activity, heat from an industrial facility being used in municipal heating, for example, or carbon dioxide streams that come out of the making of fertilizer that are used, where carbon dioxide is important, not just in putting fizz in drinks, but is used in slaughtering of chickens and cattle, to essentially euthanize them before actually killing them. So the integration, this ecosystem, is that's the reality, and yet much of the thinking is binary, two-dimensional. change it's like the Rubik's Cube. You change one thing, you change a lot of things. That's the world. And so we're having a lot of change. And it turns out that dealing with that Rubik's Cube is immensely complicated. There's so many different potential outcomes that to talk with somebody in the media, get on television, or come on the internet and say, this is what's going to happen. Turns out that that may happen, it may not happen. Something else may happen. Something even more inconvenient may happen.
So sources of liquid natural gas, does that come from more fracking?
In the United States, yes. That would be the only source, really, in the U.S. The traditional gas fields have been pretty much played out. Although in the Gulf of Mexico, there's some that comes up with oil, but in the U.S., our oil and gas industry has become a fracking industry.
And so Mexico has a lot of mountains, but they're not into fracking yet.
So fracking is mostly is fracturing shale deposits that are high in carbon content. There are also other formations, very tight, dense sandstones, but in the U.S. it's particularly shale. There are shale deposits in northeastern Mexico that are interesting because they're really an extension of the geology out of Texas. They don't have the infrastructure. It is a different legal system in the sense that in the U.S., under the resources under the ground are privately held, and in Mexico, the stuff under the ground is held by the government. It's just it's a fundamentally different way, model of ownership, and it turns out that this private approach has its advantages for mineral extraction.
Well, this is a PhD course. I was going to say MBA, but it's actually deeper and broader and really connected. So thank you very much for being on Global TV Talk Show. So in the U.S., heading into the winter, the fall and winter, I don't know whether I'm just a layman, but small business guy for a long time. I don't know whether we're going to have a recession like 08, 09. The cost of living thing, the inflation, that's a major problem, right? And what to do about it. But there are some very serious and senior, very successful business people that have spoken out in the past week saying about the Fed and that there are some companies getting ready for a depression. They're just shutting down, getting ready to lay people off because they don't want to get stuck. And then others who don't see any recession at all, really. It just cost of doing business goes up, but there's still business to get.
Right. Certainly a challenging time. When I was speaking about cost of living, for example, here in California, the cost of energy, for example, we basically in San Diego had the most expensive electricity in the world until the energy crisis in Europe. And we found a way to shift all kinds of new programs, be it to protect ourselves from wildfires or to put power lines underground for beautification. There are all kinds of things that we wanted to do and shoveled the costs of it over here. And it has had the effect of raising just this floor. I mean, this is before this wave of inflation, uh, very much triggered by the pandemic, in my view.
Mhm.
There's a recession coming. Uh, it's I think it's going to be. It will share some similarities with 2008 in the sense that uh, underlying demand is going to become a problem again. Right now, there's a lot of cash at the upper income levels, a lot of corporate liquidity where there's corporate profitability, but there's also a lot of companies that survived the last decade on cheap interest rates. Those companies that survived on cheap interest rates, they can see the handwriting on the wall with interest rates going up, and we're looking at a couple real big steps going forward as the Fed tries to assure its credibility uh, in the face of a part of the investment world that has seen all this money supply of the last decade, as being the root of this inflation. And so we're going to we're going to have to crush demand to get it under control. The head of the Bank of International Settlements earlier this week, a guy named Augustin Carstens, he used to be finance minister in Mexico, and he's one of the smartest guys around. Very perceptive, not just a PhD, book smart, very perceptive. And his view on things is, his concern is that a large part of the global economy, US, Europe, Japan, China, are heading into what in the flying world, pilot world, is called coffin corner, where the economy reaches a situation of a stall, uh, and it's a very challenging situation for a pilot in that situation, where you have to do things that are intuitively um, don't make sense intuitively. You're going to put the nose down to the ground and you're going to accelerate. This is a bit off the path, I think, in our conversation, but we're in a very challenging time, uh, and I think that the expectations. There's so many models from the past that we're applying going forward, and we're going to discover that they were better for the past. I don't know how to say it any differently. But the Fed's in a real jam, and the demand from the public and from the investment community is got to get control of inflation. We got to raise interest rates. Uh, the underlying demand in the economy is very robust, uh, and they're going to have to take a hammer to the economy to get that inflation under control. I mean, I lived through the inflation of the 70s and the 80s. I would say most people in the investment community, and really most people alive now, didn't. You did.
Yep.
We were there. Um, it wasn't pleasant. It's not going to be pleasant this time either.
So I remember in 1980, that's when I relocated myself and my business from Boston to LA. And interest rates were 15, 18% or something. It's crazy on houses, right?
Yeah.
Mortgages. And business still went on. It's just there was less of it. Okay. And the concept was to recruit people to places where there was work, relocate people. And so my business flourished because of that. I was in the catbird seat, if you will. So I relocated to where the action was, and President Reagan was coming in with big plans and all that. So the big plans was to fight the evil empire, and by rebuilding dramatically the defense business and aerospace.
Yeah.
And all of that, almost all of it, was centered in Southern California, which was Reagan's hometown. And so I relocated from Boston to LA, and California bound relocation guide and services took off. It was like the only people who could afford to buy houses were people who had a guaranteed job, and then they wanted to buy a house, and because the companies were guaranteeing, as long as this person works, he's going to get paid, he or she's going to get paid, and they're going to be qualified to get a mortgage. And so that's the economics development cycle. And the same thing's going to happen, but only new industries like electric and batteries, and enlarge the grid to pay for non-fossil cars and electronic transmission of energy from the whole deserts. You and I know, when you go out for a ride to Palm Springs or to Vegas or Central California, you go along the interstates, miles and miles and miles of the ultra solar shields in the desert, where there was farmland or just sand. And it was obvious that that's what would happen if they ever got it together. Well, they got it together. And so now the energy business in renewables through solar is what you see if you drive from San Diego to Phoenix. Okay, it doesn't matter whether it's 10 or 8, the east-west freeways, miles and miles of still available land to put the solar panels there. Not to mention the geothermal energy development, which is already there in along I-8. So I see doubling down more and more of that. I also see more development in desalinization of the ocean. They're already set up here and along California coast with the Israeli process, and the same process is used in Saudi Arabia. Why not just do it here? We need water, and just have a moon mission to solve the water problem and the electrical development situation. These are not new industries, but they're being made into new industries. And it just seems, and along with the new chip manufacturing drive, and to wit, in Phoenix Metro, that's ground zero for chips and electric car production. More power to them, and they figured it out how to do it, and they have all the land and available water apparently. So I see whole new industries replacing the old. I see more manufacturing done with automation, and a huge upscale education, reskill, upskill education business. No question about it.
Yeah, and education is really key, and then upgrading the overall skill level of the population, of those around us. Health is part of it, and I get that the future economy will be a different one that we live in today. I do remember the 80s and the Reagan defense buildup, and in Southern California, you're right. those aerospace and ocean engineering jobs, they paid really well. It was all ultimately debt financed, but that cash flowing through the economy was really, really crucial until the cost of credit came down and allowed the California housing boom to continue forward. This time, we'll see how it goes. So when I talk about the cost structure of things, while we have we're on one side of us, it's nothing but ocean, salt water, and there it is technically possible to desalinate water. In San Diego, it's pretty close to the most expensive water that we have. And it's technically possible. It's just the costs. And it's this aspect all through the economy. In the world of energy, fracking, for example. I mean, things are technically possible, but at what cost? Arizona, because of we're going into our third La Nina and just a general drying, and the plentiful cheap water. There's no more plentiful cheap water anymore. There's water out there, but it's going to get more expensive. Arizona is losing a quarter of their supply this year. And they're trying to figure it out. So far, we in California have escaped the cuts from the Colorado flows. Other states are bearing the burden. We're making more efficient use out of water that comes into the Imperial Valley. The Colorado was really set, the whole Colorado thing was set up primarily to back expansion of agriculture and tack on a few cities, back in back in the 20s when this was all put together. LA was a small city relative to what it is now. Phoenix didn't exist. Vegas didn't exist. San Diego was a sleepy village. The world has changed a lot. And the river is massively oversubscribed, has been that way for generations. We've all known it. Anyone that would take a look at the numbers, the water hasn't reached the Sea of Cortez and since the 70s, basically. Only in extreme flood situations has it gotten there. So there's an aspect of the economy in the Southwest, our agriculture and some of our industry expect water for next to nothing. And then the solution from other quarters is desalination, which is the most expensive, very energy intensive. So as we have to think through these ecosystems of activity, and there will be winners. There will be some who adjust more than others. Let me put it that way.
What about pipeline from Hudson Bay?
Sure. Yeah.
Who will benefit from the melting of the Alaska ice pack for at least for a while. But I mean, build a pipeline from there all the way to the Colorado River.
It's costs. The cheapest water in San Diego that we have now is the water that people put on grass, and they try to grow grass in a desert climate. That's the cheapest water we have. We're in the process of spending billions here in the San Diego area to bring sewage, used water, the Pure Water project, essentially taking sewage and making drinking water out of it again. I mean, in the rest of the country, they just run sewage through a sewage treatment plant and put it back in the river, and then somebody downstream uses it. So I mean, the psychology, at least for Americans, can be challenging at times. We're going to reuse our water here, but it's going to be expensive. It will change how we pay for infrastructure, in terms of the reservoirs and the aqueducts and the systems that we require to move the water that we're not able to produce locally or reuse as a source locally. But the cheapest water that we have had this last generation has been through conservation, being more efficient with what we have. It's the cheapest water, most inexpensive. It remains the case. And now the next generation for water is to reuse it. It will be expensive. So we really have to be we have to match, we have to be pragmatic about our goals and how to get there. Dreams are awesome things. They get people up in the morning and provide that energy. And that has to be matched with a practicality, which has gone missing. I get the dreams, but we need, it's kind of a cross between the dreams and the pragmatic reality. Is going to be what brings us to a healthy and sustainable future. Sustainable economically, it's sustainable environmentally.
Okay, everybody out there in the audience, David Edick Jr., that's how you find him on LinkedIn. Yes. And thank you, David, for this mastermind today. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Best wishes, everybody. Thank you. Ciao.